We are back, and this time we're going to be taking a look at another game from 2005, and I still had not seen the importance in openings. Different coaches have different philosophies, and I didn't have a specific coach. So, we're going to see a tragedy game where White has no idea how to play the opening as soon as they get out of the basic structure. Then in the following game, we'll see some redemption when I finally buckled down, and we'll talk about how I fixed my opening problems. So let's go ahead and get into this game from 2005, and it is a Sicilian. I am playing White, and at the time I'm still around 1600, and my opponent is around 1800. And I've always had the philosophy that if you're an E4 player, you should go for it. You should be playing open Sicilians. All the sidelines, they're there, they're beaten to death, but there's a reason that the best players in the world in key games, if they're E4 players, play open Sicilians, and that's what I recommend for my students. So knight f6, bothering the e-pawn, logical follow-up knight c3, and now with this move, we have reached the Najdorf. This is the most common opening in modern chess. Like when you walk around a major crowded tournament hall, I believe last time I looked at the stats, it's 1 in 3 games are a Najdorf. And that is nuts to me. I mean, it may have changed the stats to be 1 in 3 games are Sicilians, but I'm pretty sure when I looked at the stats at one point, 1 in 3 games are Sicilian Najdorfs. That's how popular this opening is, being championed first by Fischer, then by Kasparov, and it's still used at the top level by modern players today, like aggressive players like Fakir Lagrave. So here is already a key moment because there are many responses for White. Bishop e3, we have the English attack. Bishop e2, the classical Karpovian approach to playing. And, even fianchetto systems like g3. h3 has even become very popular. Bishop g5 being the main line. There's so many ways to go here. And you need to know your style as a player. And a coach can definitely help flesh out, if you're an open Sicilian player, how you should be playing at this point to maximize your potential. I've currently been working on an opening series that is coming out on the Palm Beach Chess YouTube, where I play openings that I only have a vague idea of how to play. And it's highly instructive seeing the mistakes and then the analysis of what was better from the database and the engine. And it shows and fleshes out key ideas. And I believe the same process should be done when preparing. I recommend that my students play a large number of games, a huge sample size of games with a focus on playing specific lines, not bouncing around, not d4, e4, c4, knight f3. No. If you're an e4 player, you need to play e4 every time, and we need to figure out your strengths and weaknesses. Once we've gotten to that point, then we talk more about style based off of how do you handle pressure situations. When the time is ticking and you've got, say, 10 seconds on the clock when you're playing in chess.com or Lee Chess, Chess24, your favorite server, what do you do? How do you react? Do you tend to curl up in a ball and play defense, or do you attack with reckless abandon? Do you sacrifice pieces in order to try to flag your opponent? In these pressure situations, your reaction is indicative of your natural style. And you should definitely think about associating your natural inclinations to your openings. And at the time, as a young player that was definitely high in calculation, I was a hard worker at the board when I was young. I needed to be playing one of the aggressive lines, like Bishop G5 or the English attack. So when I play this move bishop e2, I really don't believe that it was the right move for me. And if it was, I needed to play it aggressively later, which we'll see. At this point, I've started championing this interesting line, and the first time I had seen it was when Daniel Naroditsky had played it in the U.S. Championship in round 1 against Zerbo. And I really, really liked it upon analysis, and that's, if I do have an e4 book in the future, this is going to be the stable move that I'm going to be recommending as it gets off the beaten path, where the first thing to realize is if e6, g4 goes into a carries attack, which is really the reason that the Scheveningen quit being played at the top level. I believe Hu Yifan is the only player above 2600 who regularly plays the Scheveningen anymore. The other move being e5, and there's a pretty key idea that as soon as you see bishop e6, you swap gears and play f4, because you would love to play f5. And you end up getting this type of interesting structure that, though objectively it may be equal, it does have some venom and surprise value if black isn't prepared for it. And Najdorf players have so much theory they have to know, and they have to know it deeply and accurately, that these moves like 6h4 have that poison in it that I typically like to recommend for myself and my students. So coming back to the main game, bishop e2, e6, and we get the standard position here. And I mean, castles, f4, these are the normal moves, but judging by what I was talking about with aggression, I definitely should be looking at a move like g4 here. And both sides get typical development in the Sicilian. And here, after f4, we're following Ni and Li from 2012. And I believe that this is the type of position that I should have been going for, where white has a pretty clear path. I'm going to castle queenside, and I am going to attack by pressing on the king side. And I mean, you're looking at h5, g6 types ideas, or f5 at the right moment, depending upon the structure that black chooses. So this is how I should have been playing in the time period, but I didn't have direction. So already, my knowledge of this position when e5 wasn't played, so say I knew this position and queen d2 in castles, but this one, since I didn't know openings that well, I had no idea what to do. So here I played the simple move queen d2, and though it's not bad yet, the next move shows that I don't know what I'm doing in the position. It's passive, and you can't really justify the placement of the bishop on e2. So if I was going to play this, I should have left the bishop on f1, and I would have had castles queenside, and we would have had an English attack. Don't mix and match your lines. You shouldn't be feeling out how to play a position. You should stand on the shoulders of those who came before you that are much stronger. Much better would have been castle queenside, a3 to slow down b4, and then back to this g4 plan. And both sides are having fun here as we're trying to hit each other. My opponent was probably 3 to 4 times my age, and probably not interested in a tactical slugfest with someone who is high energy and able to sift through complications well. So this is, and we always have to consider psychology of competition, the much better way to go. So knight bd7, we've got f3, b5, and we've already seen that I didn't understand the position very well. Now it gets much, much worse. Because at this point, I see b5, I had little knowledge of this structure, and you should probably just bail out and get a slightly worse position with white by playing a3 and castling or something. But I go a4, and this move is just has no place in the position. It's going to make me waste time, and it's going to hurt my position while giving my opponent space. So b4, natural, and d5 gets this thematic break in, and it's a great move by black because if I don't react to it, e5, d4 will be absolutely crushing. So my opponent plays very well here and already has an advantage. I decide to take. Now I preserve the bishop pair, good decision. And then bishop g3, bothering the queen. And it's just stemming from a4, it's so much wasted time. Absolutely terrible play. Bishop f2, looking for discoveries. And you can see that spark of I'm always trying to make threats in the play. So why not play an opening that is razor sharp if you're going to play in that way? Why play something like this? So bishop g3 again, and of course I would have been happy with making a draw, but releasing tension and complications, probably not the best way to go. Rook c1, trying to hold on valiantly in the position. h6 stops the potential queen g5. King h1, and here black could just simply grab this pawn. And it's an easy pawn to win, and there's not much I can do about it. I don't know what to say. My opponent plays castles though. Now bishop c4, and the game was played a decade and a half ago, so I have no idea what was going through my head. Occasionally, I will remember certain games. This was a game that the only thing that I significantly remember was it was a lesson in pairings and preparation, because I was there a few minutes early for the game, and I was sitting at the wrong color because they had changed pairings and I didn't recheck the pairings. So I'm sitting at black and my opponent shows up 20 minutes late, and he was like, "You're sitting at the wrong color." So I had 20 minutes off my clock and the guy was 20 minutes late. So I started this game in a psychological deficit, 'cause I'm like, I showed up early, you showed up late, and yet you're getting 20 extra minutes. This is just not the way the world should work. And as a temperamental teenager, of course, I didn't take that very well. So that is the only takeaway I had from this game. It's a very uninspired effort by white, and I mean, black played a reasonable game, but nothing to be excited or brag about. So fix your openings. Major point. Understand what is right for you. Don't just do something because somebody else told you to. Try to figure out what is right for you with your opening selection. So knight takes a4. I give up the pawn in order to trade. That doesn't sound right. Well, getting some play, and we get this liquidation in, and my opponent seems very happy all throughout this game to make trades, and we end up getting to this rook and pawn endgame. So I've bailed out to a pawn down rook and pawn ending. And this is where really why I chose this game. You get the first lesson out of choosing the openings that are right for you, finding your fingerprint as a player. Now, secondly, we're going to talk about endgame technique, because a lot of the times you can find solace that your opponent cannot play an endgame to save their life. And I find that to be true in most cases. They say that you have to beat a master 3 times. And I think that is completely true and holds to this day, that players, I would say even under 2100, will struggle tremendously within games if they have not studied them quite a lot. So my opponent goes king f8. It's good. Need to activate in the ending, and it's fishing. Go ahead and take that a6 pawn so I can mate you with rook c1. So I simply stop that. He defends, and I like this next move, rook a4. It's a bit flexible, looking to potentially come over to g4, h4 if black's king runs, while at the same time keeping an idea here, potentially coming here. Flexible moves in rook and pawn end games are the way to go. And speaking of flexible moves, rook b6, that would fit the bill because it's given a tickle to the b pawn. And it should be noted that this 3 versus 4 is not just a trivial win for black. The outside pass pawns add, just a minor nuance. Black is winning here, but it requires accuracy, as we will see. h5 is a reasonable move, taking away g4 and not really giving me a reason to go rook h4. He'll simply go g6. I do like rook b6 better, though. I try not to make committal pawn moves because say you have a technical situation in a rook and pawn endgame. Say you must win this game with black. It's the final round. You must win it in order to get a title or to get money. Well, if I shuffle, seeing that my opponent is taking a lot of time with white for no reason, he should just be playing quick moves here that are solid and flexible. We could move rooks around quite a lot without repeating 3 times and making a draw. I can lull my opponent into a sense of complacency playing cat and mouse by playing moves like rook b6. Because if he goes rook a3 and then I go king e7 and then we're shuffling, we're kind of doing a dance. I'll go king e8. Well, maybe he goes back. We can do different moves quite frequently here without really changing the character of the position. The point of doing this is if you're playing the clock, you don't have a major increment, and it's say normal USCF time controls is a 5-second delay, your opponent has a higher chance of blundering with less time. So you can play 49 moves straight without a pawn push or capture before finally making a pawn push, resetting that counter, and then playing 49 more moves. So some people see that as dirty flagging, but how bad do you want to win? Are you willing to dig down and use absolutely everything at your disposal to win games? That's a question that you got to ask. I mean, with 30-second increment and modern FIDE time controls, that's really not happening ever. But blitz, bullet, 5-second delay, definitely something that comes into play. So after rook h4, h5, back to the main game. King f2, good move, rook b6. I say, okay, well, king g3, my king's in a decent spot, and if you take my b pawn, I take your a pawn, and I got some reasonable drawing chances here. So king f4, not my first choice move. I would probably do something like rook a5 now, and see what we have going. I'm just going to play rook a4, and I'm going to sit. And maybe even after g6, I play h4 to try to secure the structure a bit. And I'm not going to do anything here. I'm going to sit and wait, and I'm going to try to keep your king away. If your king runs, my king has a potential path to come up here and create counterplay. But in the meantime, you're going to have to prove it. And passive defense occasionally is the way to go. Don't always feel like you need to do something. So king f4, h4, and king e4 is flexible. But this next move, I definitely would not consider today, and that's g4. g3 is a move I might consider, but g4, I'm helping black by loosening up my pawns. And here, this is already a win if a5, because if you take check first, takes, check, and take, and anytime you see 2 connected passers versus 1, that should be all she wrote in a rook and pawn endgame. So G4, my opponent plays F6, not seeing the nuance, and I play B4, and we end up getting this position. And F4 is a move that I also wouldn't consider, but I'm running out of moves, so it's understandable. And now Rook C5, looking for counterplay. Now, this position is absolutely critical. I want you to take your time here and pretend you're black. Pause the video if you need to, and try to find the best move. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and took some time. The natural move, King E6, which my opponent played in the game, actually leads to a draw. You have to find this strong Rook B5 move, which just wins. If I trade, you've got a protected pass pawn on E4. All you got to do is jockey the king, do a little triangulation. Pawn's going to be pushed forward. White's pawns are going to fall. Black wins. And if we decline the trade, it's very easy to move the king to defend the pawn. Check. Some more pawns fall for white. We understand how this is going to fall apart. King E6 was played though. Now, Rook A5, decent move. And here, King E2 is a move which does nothing. It's much better for white to simply move the rook back and forth here. So if Rook A4, for instance, I'm just going to move the rook. Okay, so now you're threatening check. So now I'm going to go King E2, Rook A1, and there's no progress here. Put it in the engine, play around with it. It's ridiculous, but it's the nature of the pawn structure that if the rook ever leaves, I'm taking with check, and another pawn is going to fall before you're ever going to get to one. So black could very well press and lose this position if he's not careful. So coming back, King E2 was played in the game, and my opponent could have went with Rook takes B4, but Rook A5 holds again for white. Because anytime the king comes to touch the F-pawn for defense, I check him away and then go back to attacking. So Rook D6. Well, what about this move, B5? There's no reason to trade off the pawn. I have the positive dynamic here. My pawn is defended. His pawn is not. B5 is a terrible, terrible practical move. King E1 is equal, as the black rook can't leave the defense of the A-pawn. So B5, and on Rook A6, this next move is extremely important. So it is not out of reach for white to have good holding chances here, but you must find an accurate move. Let's pause your video, try to figure it out. Okay, hopefully you pause. Now, I played Rook C5 in the game. I had the when in doubt, pass it out. But nope, Rook B3. We need to control the rank. Rook A2 check. Holds the F-pawn. And he needs to stop us from checking him, because if he goes after our pawn, it could fall apart for him quite quickly here. Either I'm going to check forever, or when the F-pawn falls, it becomes very, very difficult for black to attempt to win this game. But Rook C5, white is now losing again. He gets Rook F3 in, which he did not have in the variation we were just looking at. And the rest of it is a matter of technique, as we see 2 versus 1. Talked about that as basically a sure thing when they're connected passers. And let's see how we did it. I love black's king's position. He's using the pawns as a shield. Getting behind pass pawns, very important. The closer a pawn gets with the rook in front of it, the weaker that rook gets, and the stronger this rook gets. Keep that in mind. That's why rooks are meant to go behind passed pawns. So threatening mate. Good move. And now we are in a technical position. If we swapped king positions, it would be a draw. But since my king cannot control the queening square, not much can be done here. King h3, and with the king cut off, it's just nothing doing. So no real excuses here. And regardless of the move that is made, whether, say, I come here to stop him from moving, he'll just go here because of his rook and queen. And if I check, he can either block with the rook or move the king with the subsequent push of the pawn. And that'll do it for this one. So like I said, this video and the next video are going to go hand in hand, as the next video is a bit of a redemption game in playing the white side of an open Sicilian, and you'll see I started to come into my own more as a player. So hopefully the major points of this video were not missed, that you've got to find the opening systems that are right for you and your fingerprint as a player.